Imagine it's February 2026. You're sitting in your apartment in Columbus, Ohio. You work full time. You got a raise last year, 3%. Your company called it competitive. You believe them. You're looking at your bank statement. The numbers don't add up. You earned more than you ever have. But at the end of every month, there's less left over than there was 5 years ago. The balance drifts lower, not dramatically, not in a way that screams emergency, just slowly, persistently. Like a tide pulling sand from under your feet so gently you don't realize the ground is disappearing until you look down. You haven't bought anything extravagant. No sports car, no luxury vacation. You eat out occasionally. You stream shows at night. You pay for convenience where it seems reasonable. You drive a decent car. You live what appears to be a modest life. And yet the math doesn't work. This isn't theory, it's documented behavior. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Data shows that average American household spending in 2024 reached $78,233. That's a 5.1% increase from the previous year. Meanwhile, average wages increased 3.8%. Spending is growing faster than income. And this isn't happening because people suddenly became reckless. It's happening because the structure of modern consumption has been redesigned, product by product, service by service, to extract more while delivering less. The things you buy today are not priced the way they were priced a decade ago. The business models have shifted beneath you, and by the time you feel the impact, the money's already gone. What you're about to hear is not financial advice, it's a system autopsy. I'm going to walk you through 12 categories of spending that have become economically indefensible in 2026. Not because these things are inherently bad, but because the math has changed. The pricing models have changed, the incentive structures behind them have changed, and the people who designed those changes understood something most consumers still don't. Once you see the extraction mechanism, you cannot unsee it. To understand why common purchases have become financial traps, you first need to understand the historical context. For most of the 20th century, the American consumer economy operated on a relatively straightforward model. Companies made products. They sold them at a markup. You paid once, you owned the thing. The relationship ended. If the company wanted more revenue, they had to make something new that you wanted to buy. This model had a natural limit, your income. If you couldn't afford something, you didn't buy it. Simple. But starting in the late 1990s and accelerating through the 2010s, a different model emerged. Executives studied behavioral economics. They analyzed friction points. They learned that consumers would tolerate small, repeated charges far more readily than single large ones. They learned that convenience could be monetized at rates that would seem absurd if presented transparently. They learned that subscriptions create inertia, that payment fragmentation obscures total cost, that status signaling could command premiums disconnected from utility. This wasn't conspiracy, it was optimization. Every pricing structure you encounter today has been tested, measured, and refined to extract the maximum amount you're willing to pay without triggering resistance. The result is an economy where the gap between what something costs to provide and what you pay for it has widened dramatically in categories that feel like ordinary life. And because these extractions happen in small increments across dozens of transactions, the cumulative damage remains invisible until you run the numbers. Let's run the numbers. Purchase 1. Food delivery applications. Start with something simple. You're tired. You don't want to cook. You open an app. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub. You scroll through restaurants. You tap a few items. You pay. Food arrives. Convenient. Here's what the interface doesn't show you. The menu prices on delivery apps are typically 15 to 30% higher than the same items ordered directly from the restaurant. This isn't the app's fee. This is a hidden markup built into the listed price because restaurants must pay the platform commission of up to 30% of every order. They raise prices on the app to compensate. You never see the restaurant's actual menu. You don't know you're paying a premium for the privilege of ordering through an intermediary. Then the visible fees begin: delivery fee, service fee, small order fee if your total is below a threshold, regulatory response fee in some jurisdictions, tip. By the time you complete checkout, a meal that costs $12 at the restaurant counter costs $22 through the app. Sometimes more. The markup can exceed 80%. Now multiply that by behavior patterns. Industry data shows that regular app users order twice per week on average. At $15 in added costs per order, that's $30 weekly, $1,560 annually, gone. Not on food, on the mechanism of obtaining food. This isn't paying for convenience, this is paying a tax on exhaustion. And the apps know exactly when you're most vulnerable. The push notifications arrive at 6 p.m. on weekdays, after work, when willpower is depleted. This is not accidental, it's designed. The historical parallel here is older than you might expect. In 19th century American mining towns, companies operated stores where workers were required to shop. Prices were inflated. Workers paid with company scrip. The company extracted back a portion of every wage it paid. Economists called this the truck system. It was eventually outlawed in most jurisdictions because it was recognized as exploitative. Food delivery apps operate on the same principle, just with better interfaces and no legal prohibition. The extraction is voluntary, but the psychology is engineered. Purchase. 2. New automobiles. The automobile market has undergone a structural shift that most buyers still don't fully register. When you purchase a new car in 2026, you lose approximately 20% of its value the moment you drive it off the lot. Within 12 months, depreciation typically reaches 25 to 30%. A $40,000 vehicle becomes a $28,000 vehicle in 1 year. You paid for $12,000 that ceased to exist. This has always been true of new cars to some degree. What's changed is the financing structure that obscures it. The average new car payment in the United States is now $738 per month. Loan terms have stretched to 72 and 84 months to make payments appear manageable. But this creates a trap. For the first 2 to 3 years of ownership, you owe more than the car is worth. You're underwater. If you need to sell, you must pay the difference. If the car is totaled, your insurance payout may not cover your loan balance without gap coverage. Meanwhile, the car itself has become a subscription delivery device. Features that were once standard, like heated seats or remote start, are now offered as monthly subscriptions on some models. BMW briefly charged $18 per month to use heated seats that were already physically installed in the vehicle. The backlash forced reversal in some markets, but the precedent is set. Manufacturers have discovered that hardware can be monetized repeatedly. The mathematical reality is this: a vehicle purchased at 5 years old with 40,000 miles has already absorbed the steepest depreciation. It will cost 30 to 50% less than the equivalent new model. Modern reliability engineering means it likely has another 100,000 miles of functional life remaining. The person who buys new pays a premium for the privilege of absorbing a loss that someone else could have avoided. In an environment where wages grow at 3.8% and vehicle prices have increased 40% since 2019, the calculus has shifted. New car purchases have become wealth transfers from buyers to manufacturers and lenders, structured as transportation. Purchase. 3. Traditional dining restaurants exist at the intersection of several economic pressures that have converged to make traditional dining one of the most inefficient uses of household income in 2026. Since 2019, restaurant prices have increased approximately 35%. This isn't simply inflation. It reflects compounding increases in commercial rent, food costs, labor costs, and the elimination of lower-priced establishments that couldn't survive the pandemic disruption. The restaurants that remain have pricing power. They use it. A casual dinner for 2 people at a mid-tier restaurant now costs between $100 and $140. This includes appetizers, entrees, modest beverages, tax, and tip. The same meal prepared at home costs $15 to $25 in ingredients. But the most significant extraction point isn't the food, it's the beverages. Restaurant beverage markups routinely exceed 300%. Wine that costs $12 at retail sells for $45 to $60 at restaurants. A cocktail with $3 worth of ingredients sells for $16. A glass of draft beer that costs the establishment 80 cents sells for $7. The business model of many restaurants now depends on beverage margins to achieve profitability. Food is almost a loss leader. The real transaction is convincing you to drink. This is not a criticism of restaurants or their owners, who face genuine economic pressures. It's an observation about where value flows. When you sit down at a restaurant, you're not primarily purchasing food. You're purchasing real estate rental for 2 hours, service labor, ambiance, and beverages at extreme markup. The food is incidental to the economic structure. Once you understand this, dining out shifts from routine to occasion, not because it's wrong to pay for experience, but because understanding what you're actually buying changes how often it makes sense to buy it. Purchase. 4. Streaming service accumulation. Here's a number that reveals how quietly subscriptions colonize budgets. If you subscribe to Netflix, Disney+, Hulu, HBO Max, Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV+, Peacock, and Paramount Plus simultaneously, your monthly streaming cost exceeds $100. That's $1,200 per year on television. This would have been unthinkable in 2015. The original promise of streaming was cord cutting. Escape the cable bundle. Pay only for what you want. Save money. What happened instead was bundle reconstruction. Each content library fragmented into proprietary platforms. To access the same breadth of content you once had through cable, you now need multiple subscriptions. The aggregate cost approaches or exceeds what cable charged. But it feels cheaper because each individual charge is small. $15 here, $13 there. The fragmentation is the feature. There's a behavioral mechanism at work here that economists have studied extensively. Subscription services exploit what researchers call the flat rate bias. Consumers prefer predictable monthly payments to per-use charges, even when per-use would cost less. We overestimate how much we'll use something and underestimate how often we'll forget we're paying for it. The data confirms this. Industry analyses suggest that 30% of streaming subscribers have at least one service they rarely or never use, but continue paying for. The friction of cancellation exceeds the inertia of monthly charges. This is why free trials require credit cards. This is why cancellation processes involve multiple confirmation screens and guilt-inducing retention offers. The historical parallel is the magazine subscription model of the mid-20th century. Publishers discovered that automatic renewals dramatically increased lifetime customer value, not because readers wanted to renew, but because they forgot to cancel. The streaming industry has refined this to mathematical precision. The rational approach is rotation, subscribe to one service, watch what you want, cancel, subscribe to the next. The content will still be there. But rationality requires attention, and attention is exactly what these systems are designed to exhaust. Purchase. 5. Fast food. There's a particular cruelty in what's happened to fast food pricing. Fast food was never health food, but for decades it served an economic function. It was cheap. A worker on a limited budget could eat a filling meal for a few dollars. Speed and low cost were the value proposition. The food was fuel for people who couldn't afford better or didn't have time for alternatives. That economic contract has been broken. Fast food prices have increased approximately 55% since 2019. A combo meal at a major chain now costs between $10 and $15. In many markets, it approaches the cost of casual dining. But you're still eating in your car. You're still consuming food engineered for cost minimization at the manufacturing level, not your nutritional benefit. The value proposition has collapsed. You're paying near restaurant prices for food with restaurant-grade caloric density, but none of the experience, service, or ingredient quality. The math has flipped. If you eat fast food 3 times per week at $12 per meal, you spend $1,000 to $872 annually. The same money could fund high-quality home-cooked meals for a family, or it could simply not be spent, remaining in your account to compound. What happened? Several factors converged. Labor costs increased as minimum wages rose. Commercial real estate costs in high-traffic locations escalated. Supply chain disruptions created ingredient cost volatility. And crucially, consumers demonstrated through behavior that they would pay higher prices rather than abandon the convenience. So prices rose to capture that willingness. This is how markets work. They don't charge what things cost. They charge what buyers will pay. And buyers have paid. Purchase. 6. Current generation. Consumer technology. When the smartphone emerged in the late 2000s, each generation represented a genuine leap. The difference between the iPhone 3G and the iPhone 4 was substantial. Camera quality, processing speed, screen resolution, application capabilities. Upgrading meant accessing new possibilities. That era has ended. Contemporary smartphone releases offer marginal improvements. Slightly better cameras, slightly faster processors, slightly refined designs. The differences between a flagship phone released in 2024 and one released in 2026 are difficult for most users to perceive in daily use. Yet the prices have escalated. Current flagship devices cost approximately $1,200. Some exceed $1,500. The innovation curve has flattened. The pricing curve has not. What this means economically is that the rational purchase is no longer the newest device. A phone that is 1 or 2 generations old provides 95% of the functionality at 40 to 60% of the price. Certified refurbished devices from manufacturers offer the same core technology with warranty coverage at significant discounts. Yet upgrade cycles remain short. The average American replaces their smartphone every 2 to 3 years, often not because the device failed, but because of perceived obsolescence. New models create social pressure. Operating system updates are eventually discontinued for older devices, creating artificial death dates. Carriers offer trade-in incentives that obscure the total cost of upgrading. The pattern here echoes the planned obsolescence model introduced by General Motors in the 1920s. Alfred Sloan realized that annual model changes, primarily cosmetic, could convince buyers to replace functional vehicles. The goal was not building better cars. It was building dissatisfaction with current cars. Well, the strategy worked. It still works. The person who buys a 2-year-old phone and uses it for 4 years spends a fraction of what the person who upgrades every 18 months spends. The experience is nearly identical. The financial outcomes diverge dramatically. Purchase. 7. The wedding industry. The average American wedding now costs approximately $35,000. In major metropolitan areas, the figure exceeds $50,000. This represents one of the purest examples of what economists call Veblen pricing. Named after economist Thorstein Veblen, It describes goods whose demand increases as price increases because high price itself signals status. The wedding industry has perfected the exploitation of this dynamic. Vendors charge premiums specifically because an event is labeled a wedding. The same flowers, the same catering, the same photography cost more when associated with a wedding than when associated with any other event. Studies have documented markup differences of 50 to 300% for identical services. Why do couples pay? Because the wedding has been culturally constructed as a singular, unrepeatable event where cost considerations feel inappropriate. To economize is to diminish the moment. To negotiate is to cheapen the love. These are narratives. They are remarkably profitable narratives for the vendors who perpetuate them. The financial consequence is that many marriages begin not with a foundation, but with a hole. $35,000 that could have served as a housing down payment, emergency fund, or investment capital instead evaporates in a single day. Often, it's financed through debt, beginning the legal partnership with a liability rather than an asset. Historical perspective is useful here. The elaborate American wedding is a 20th century invention, heavily promoted by industries that profit from it. Jewelry companies, bridal magazines, venue operators, and vendors created the expectations that now feel like immutable tradition. Your grandmother's wedding was likely modest by current standards. She was not less married. The couples who allocate $10,000 to a meaningful celebration and $25,000 to their financial future are making a choice the industry discourages. They're also making the mathematically sound choice. Purchase. 8. Premium leisure. Travel has repriced itself beyond the reach of casual expenditure. Airfare, lodging, dining, and activities have collectively increased 30 to 40% since 2019. A week-long trip for two now costs between $4,000 and $6,000 for moderate-tier experiences. Family trips to major destinations like Disney World regularly reach $8,000 to $10,000. Several mechanisms drive this. Airlines have consolidated, reducing competition. Hotel chains have optimized dynamic pricing algorithms that raise rates during high-demand periods. Destinations have added fees, from resort fees to parking charges to mandatory service gratuities. What appears as one price on a booking site becomes a significantly higher price at checkout. But the more concerning development is how travel is financed. Industry surveys indicate that a substantial percentage of vacation spending is placed on credit cards and not immediately paid off. The vacation becomes an installment liability. The memories compound with interest. There's nothing inherently wrong with travel. Experiences have value, but the structural shift is that premium travel has moved from occasional splurge to regular expectation for middle-income households whose incomes haven't kept pace. The aspiration was manufactured by social media, where curated travel content creates comparison pressure. The financing was enabled by credit access. The result is travel that extracts wealth rather than enriching life. When you pay 7% interest on a vacation for 18 months, you're not paying for the vacation. You're paying for the vacation plus a penalty for not being able to afford it when you took it. That penalty accrues silently, invisible, until you examine the debt trajectory. Purchase. 9. Fragmented payment services. Buy now, pay later. Services represent the latest evolution in consumer credit, and their growth reveals something important about contemporary household economics. Platforms like Affirm, Klarna, and Afterpay allow consumers to split purchases into installments, often interest-free if payments are made on time. The appeal is obvious. A $300 purchase becomes 4 payments of $75. Manageable, accessible. The data on what happens next is less comfortable. Studies indicate that consumers using buy now, pay later spend 10 to 40% more than they would paying upfront. The installment structure reduces the psychological pain of payment, which is precisely why it increases spending. You feel like you're spending less because each individual payment is small, but you're actually spending more because the reduced friction enables purchases you would otherwise skip. More concerning, nearly 40% of buy now, pay later users have missed at least one payment. When that happens, fees and interest often apply. The interest-free promise becomes interest-bearing debt. Because these platforms often don't report to credit bureaus until default, users can accumulate obligations across multiple services without clear visibility into their total exposure. This is not traditional lending. Traditional lenders assess your ability to repay and have regulatory obligations around disclosure. Buy now, pay later exists in a regulatory gap, offering credit-like products without credit-like protections. The historical parallel is layaway, which department stores offered in the mid-20th century. But layaway required you to pay before receiving the goods. You couldn't use the item until it was fully paid. That sequencing encouraged patience. Buy now, pay later inverts this. You get the item immediately. Patience is not required. Only future payments are required. And future payments feel abstract until they're due. Purchase. 10. Brand premium products. Walk through any grocery store or pharmacy and you'll encounter two categories of product: name brands and store brands. The packaging differs, the marketing differs. Often the contents do not. Pharmaceutical generics contain the same active ingredients as brand name medications by legal requirement. Store brand food products are frequently manufactured in the same facilities as national brands, differing only in labeling. Consumer reports and independent testing organizations routinely find that store brands match or exceed brand name quality across dozens of categories. Yet brand premiums persist, and they are significant. Branded products typically cost 20 to 100% more than equivalent store brands. A family that switches from branded to store brand products across groceries, household supplies, and over-the-counter medications can save $1,500 to $2,500 annually. That's real money, not theoretical money, not round number money, real money that currently flows from household budgets to marketing departments. The premium you pay for a brand is not a quality premium. It's a familiarity premium. It's the cost of the advertising that made you recognize the package. You're paying for your own conditioning. This isn't to suggest all brands are worthless. Some categories exhibit genuine quality differences, but many do not. And the only way to know which is to test. Try the store brand. If it performs identically, you've found free money. If it doesn't, you've spent $2 on information. The aggregate impact of brand loyalty across an economy is staggering. Billions flow annually from consumers to marketing budgets, not product improvements. This is a choice. Most people don't realize they're making it. Purchase. 11. Subscription box services. The subscription box model emerged from a clever insight. People enjoy receiving packages. The anticipation of a delivery triggers measurable psychological pleasure. What if that pleasure could be monetized on a recurring basis? Boxes now exist for nearly every category: cosmetics, snacks, pet supplies, books, clothing, coffee, razor blades. The pitch is curation. Experts select items for you. Discovery is automated. Surprise arrives monthly. Here's what the model actually delivers. Subscription boxes typically cost $25 to $50 per month. The items inside rarely exceed and often fall short of this value if purchased individually. The curation frequently consists of excess inventory, sample sizes, or products that didn't sell through traditional channels. You're paying a premium to receive goods that brands wanted to offload anyway. The business model depends entirely on subscription inertia. Boxes ship automatically. Cancellation requires active effort. The pleasure of initial sign-up fades. The boxes pile up unopened, but the charges continue. Industry data shows that subscription box churn rates are high, but reactivation rates are also high. The same customers cycle through sign-up, fatigue, cancellation, and resurgence. Each cycle extracts additional revenue. The companies have modeled this. They know the average customer lifetime. They know the acquisition cost. They know how many boxes they'll ship before cancellation. The math works for them. Whether the math works for you depends on whether you'd have purchased those specific items at those specific prices without the subscription. The answer, for most subscribers, is no. The box creates demand for things you didn't previously want, then charges you for fulfilling that artificial demand. Purchase. 12. Daily premium coffee. This one appears trivial. It is not. The average premium coffee drink costs approximately $6. One per day, 5 days per week, 50 weeks per year equals $1,500 annually. If you stop on weekends too, you reach $2,190. Making equivalent coffee at home costs roughly 15 cents per cup. Annual cost, approximately $180. The difference is $2,000 per year, every year. Now here's where the math becomes difficult to ignore. $2,000 per year, invested in a broad market index fund averaging 7% annual returns, grows to approximately $245,000 over 30 years. That is not a typo. $250,000, the price of a house in many American cities. The difference between a comfortable retirement and a constrained one. You're not buying coffee. You're buying a ritual, a location, a brief moment of pleasure in a transaction with a barista who knows your order. These things have value. But $245,000 over a working lifetime is a specific quantity of value. You should know you're spending it. The coffee shop business model was pioneered by Starbucks in the 1980s and 1990s. Howard Schultz studied Italian espresso bars and understood that Americans would pay premium prices not for superior coffee, but for a third place between home and work. The experience was the product. The coffee was the delivery mechanism. This insight was correct and profitable. Starbucks created enormous shareholder value by identifying and monetizing a psychological need. The question is not whether they were clever. They were. The question is whether you want your psychological needs monetized at $2,000 per year. Here's where all 12 of these extraction points converge. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data tells a simple story. Household spending is increasing at 5.1% annually. Wages are increasing at 3.8% annually. This is a gap of 1.3 percentage points per year. This gap compounds. After 10 years of this pattern, assuming constant rates, spending capacity exceeds income by approximately 14%. After 20 years, the divergence widens further. The mathematics are straightforward. If outflows grow faster than inflows, the balance eventually reaches zero, then goes negative. Then debt accumulates to fill the gap. This is not a crisis that arrives suddenly. It's a gradient, a slow slide. The household that could save 15% of income now saves 8%, then 5%, then nothing, then borrows. Each transition feels manageable. The aggregate trajectory is not. The 12 categories I've described represent extraction points along this gradient. Each one is individually defensible. Nobody tells you to skip every restaurant meal forever. Nobody tells you that owning a smartphone is foolish. The extractions feel like life. But collectively, across the median American household, these 12 categories can easily represent $10,000 to $20,000 of annual expenditure that delivers disproportionately less value than its cost. That is the gap. That is where the money goes. That is why the bank balance drifts lower despite raises and promotions and doing everything that was supposed to work. The system is not broken, it's optimized, just not for you. This is the part most financial content won't say plainly. The extraction mechanisms I have described are not bugs, they're features. They exist because they work, meaning they generate profit for the entities that deploy them. DoorDash's market capitalization depends on maintaining delivery fee structures. Automakers' margins depend on depreciation curves that advantage new sales. Streaming platforms' valuations depend on subscription inertia. Fast food chains' earnings depend on customers who haven't recalculated the value proposition. These are publicly traded companies with fiduciary obligations to shareholders. Their legal mandate is to maximize returns. Your financial well-being is not their concern. This isn't villainy, it's structure. Expecting these entities to voluntarily reduce extraction is like expecting water to flow uphill. The incentives point the other direction. The only force that changes behavior is losing customers. And most customers don't change behavior because the extractions are individually small, emotionally justified, and socially normalized. Everyone you know uses delivery apps. Everyone drives a newish car. Everyone subscribes to multiple streaming services. Everyone grabs coffee on the way to work. The behavior is invisible because it's ubiquitous. And because it's invisible, it persists. If this analysis sounds pessimistic, consider the historical frequency of these dynamics. In the company towns of 19th century America, workers paid inflated prices at company stores because the company controlled the commercial infrastructure. The workers knew they were being extracted from, but the alternatives were worse. Leave or pay. In post-war America, planned obsolescence became explicit corporate strategy. General Motors, General Electric, and other manufacturers deliberately designed products to fail or become unfashionable, forcing replacement purchases. Consumers adapted their expectations. Replacement became normal. In the 1980s and 1990s, credit card companies refined psychological targeting, extending credit to consumers who would carry balances and pay interest. The profitable customer was not the one who paid in full. It was the one who paid the minimum. In each era, industries discovered mechanisms to capture value beyond the utility of their products. Sears. In each era, consumers adjusted slowly, often generationally. The people who survived extraction were the ones who saw the mechanism early and opted out. That's the pattern. Systems optimize for extraction. People who recognize extraction can sometimes avoid it. People who don't recognize it become the source of profit. This isn't cynicism, it's documented economic history. I've walked you through 12 categories where the mathematics have shifted against the consumer, where pricing structures, behavioral manipulation, and structural inertia combine to transfer wealth from households to corporations in ways that feel normal but compound devastatingly. The question isn't whether these extractions exist, they're documented. The question is, what happens when enough households run the numbers? Some will change nothing. Convenience is powerful, status is powerful, habit is powerful. And the extractions are designed to feel painless until they're not. Some will adjust at the margins, cut one subscription, make coffee at home, buy the used car. These adjustments compound just like the extractions do, but in the other direction. And some will recognize that the entire structure of modern consumption is engineered to produce exactly the outcome the Bureau of Labor Statistics documents. Spending rising faster than income, year after year, until the balance reaches zero. The gap is not accidental, it's structural. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial advice, investment guidance, or a recommendation to take any specific action. Your circumstances are unique. Consult qualified professionals for personal financial decisions. The patterns I study here don't appear in headlines. They don't trend on social media. They unfold across years and decades, visible only to those who examine the ledgers after the fact. This channel exists because some people prefer to see the mechanism before it reaches their account balance, before the compounding works against them, before the slow slide becomes irreversible. If you're one of those people, you know what to do.